Today, we are talking about mastery learning. In the book Blended, Michael B. Horn and I suggest that there are two main components to student-centered learning. One is the personalization of learning, where learning is tailored to the needs and circumstances and interests and abilities of each learner. And the second big component is that the learning is mastery-based, that it's more based on students moving through content as they demonstrate competency with the learning objectives for that piece of the content. And that when you marry those two ideas, personalization and competency-based learning or mastery-based learning, that's when you start to have a more student-centered system. And then the role of technology in that, online learning and blended learning, is to allow us to bring those ideals to students at scale. It's really hard to genuinely personalize and create a mastery-based progression for students without the help of technology. It's very time-consuming. So those are some of the principal bedrock beliefs in the book Blended, and it made sense to me because those concepts are so near and dear to my heart and so foundational to what student-centered learning is. To bring in a national expert on mastery learning and learn from him today. So with us is Scott Ellis, who's going to brief us on mastery learning. He is going to talk about how to bring mastery learning to life at scale. Scott is the founding CEO of Mastery Track, and he's formerly the founding CEO of the Learning Accelerator. Scott and I also happen to attend the same college and went to the same consulting firm after college, so we have some background in common, which endears me to Scott Ellis. So with that, I'd like to turn the time to him. He's going to share his screen and walk us through a briefing on mastery-based learning, and then we'll share. He'll do that for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. So please be thinking of what questions or comments you want to share with Scott. Take it away.
Very good. And Heather, you should just wave if at any point you can't hear me or the tech breaks down, just wave so I know. But hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. Like Heather, this is a subject very near and dear to my heart. For the last several years, I've been working on blended, personalized, student-centered learning. And really my lens is that as a country, we've made tremendous progress over the last several years, right? We've got the more and more of the tech infrastructure in place. So internet connectivity, devices, more support for teachers. People are really understanding more what it is and kind of grappling with it. And also then saying, now what? So we're kind of getting a lot of the pieces, but I think as Heather described, really, it's about combining several of them to make the magic happen. And so what I really want to talk about is my thoughts based on my own journey in this work, and then some specifics about how to help bring it to life at scale. So specifically what I'll do is provide a little bit of framing for what are we talking about, and I think I'll very much aligned to Heather's definition, talk about what I think are some of the key elements of mastery learning that really must be present in order for it to happen. And this is not a matter of what system you use or what approach, but I think from a logical standpoint, these must be present. Talk a little bit about a bigger vision for a kind of comprehensive content architecture, and then talk about challenges, and then look forward to questions and conversation. So again, aligned to Heather's description, this is the lens that I've used when talking about what is mastery learning and where does it fit. At the Learning Accelerator, for a number of years, we really worked on the kind of trying to define what we're talking about. And really, it's about the combining in-person learning with technology, right? So technology is key for scale, and educators are absolutely critical. And it's really about personalization, as Heather described, and mastery learning. We also talk about the importance of real-time data as part of this. But when I talk about mastery learning and where it fits, this is the lens that I use. And when I think about competency-based education, proficiency, et cetera, those are all, in my view, those are all the same thing. Those are all synonyms for mastery learning. So we're talking about this piece here, which is fundamentally about how do we enable students to move forward at their own pace as they master content. Well, in order for this to happen at scale, I think 5 things need to be present. And so when I'm talking to schools and they say, yeah, we've got kids moving at their own pace. And I say, oh, really? How exactly are you doing that? I'm listening for 5 things, and here's what they are. The first is learning objectives. Second is mastery thresholds, and I think these 2 are really critical and kind of are the bedrock of everything. Then clarity about how students demonstrate mastery, how teachers assess, and then organizing and displaying the data. And what I would say is, if you want students to move forward at their own pace, these 5 elements must be present. If they're not there, then I am very skeptical about whether this is happening or whether it's happening in a scalable way. So let's talk about each of these real briefly. Learning objectives, the key is we need to know, what do we want students to learn? What do we want them to know or be able to do when we're done? The key is these must be specific, clear, and demonstrable. I would say that many existing state standards, Common Core, and many others don't actually enable mastery learning at all because they're not specific, they're not clear. You've got multiple objectives in one place. We run into situations all the time where teachers aren't even teaching all of the parts of them. And so we've really got to be clear about what do we want the students to know or be able to do. Next is, for each learning objective, what does it mean to master the learning objective? How do we know when they're ready to move on to the next thing? And sometimes when people say mastery, I kind of feel like a choir should break out and there's a halo and everyone says, oh, mastery. And I say, hold on, folks. We do this all the time because at some point an educator's working with a student and they say, yep, the learning I was hoping for has occurred. Now it's time to move on. That's what mastery means. We can no longer say, it's Tuesday, time to move on, right? Because the district pacing guide says so, or the calendar says so. In a mastery world, we need to know, has the student mastered it or not? This, like the learning objectives, must be very clear. Then the key is, how does a student demonstrate mastery? Are they taking a written test? Are they solving problems? Are they doing a project or a presentation? And this needs to be scalable. Every student, every learning objective. And I'm fine if there are multiple ways for students to demonstrate mastery, but they all need to be equally valid. And then linked to this, how does the teacher assess mastery? Is there automatic grading, or is the teacher manually grading essays? Are they watching a presentation? The key thing to keep in mind is if a student tries to demonstrate mastery and does not succeed, there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's no failure in a mastery-based system. So if they try to demonstrate mastery again, the teacher will need to assess it again. So we need to make sure there's enough time for the teacher. If, for example, they're regrading an essay, the teacher needs enough time to do that because this also must be scalable. Every student, every teacher, every learning objective. And then the last is we've got to have a way to organize and display the data. Teachers and students and principals and parents need to instantly be able to see where students are in their learning, because once you have this data at your fingertips, now the personalized learning can happen. Now we can see some students are further ahead. How do we help them? Some are further behind. What do we do to support those folks? It's not a race, but that data is the starting point. I believe it's the cornerstone that enables mastery learning, student-centered learning, blended learning, all of this to occur. So these, I think, are the key elements of mastery learning. And this is what I'm always looking for, trying to create, and also listening for as more and more folks say, yes, we're doing this. I think these are the 5 key pieces that must be there. And then now these link to a bigger vision. Because if we think about these elements and say, so now what does it really look like as we build a bigger infrastructure to support this? Again, the starting point is the learning objectives and mastery thresholds. Sometimes I think about this like we're creating a human body. And this is the skeleton. This is the structure that holds everything together. If you've got a mushy skeleton, your body doesn't hold up very well. Or if you've got lots of skeletons, now you kind of have a mess. The key is learning objectives, mastery thresholds, very clear. As we mentioned, right, specific, clear, and demonstrable. Make sure that the other thing I would say that I didn't mention is I believe these pieces should be freely available to all students and teachers. Right? These should not be proprietary. People should not charge for these. Everyone in the country should know today what the learning objectives are and what the mastery thresholds are. So these all need to be crystal clear. Once you have those, the next piece is the next 3 elements I described: how students demonstrate mastery, how teachers assess, and how to display the data, all of which are directly aligned to the learning objectives and the mastery thresholds. The key in a lot of these things is scalability. Every student, every learning objective, every teacher. Again, it's okay if there's more than one way to demonstrate mastery as long as they're all equally valid and sufficient, right? All of them say, yep, the student has mastered this. And keeping in mind that teachers may need to grade things multiple times, we've got to make sure they have enough time to do that work. And then the last element is how students learn, how teachers teach, and how we train teachers, learning resources, practice resources, curricula, teacher PD, all of which, again, are aligned to the learning objectives and the mastery thresholds. And I think the key thing to think about this is there's precise alignment. So we get away from the kind of vague and what I would describe as unhelpful tagging that we're all doing now, trying to figure out which resource kind of helps me with this objective. Clarity, I think, really transforms this. The other thing to keep in mind is whereas the learning objectives and mastery thresholds really don't change hardly at all, right? I mean, multiplication is really not different. Every once in a while, we'll figure out whether Pluto's a planet or not. And so we may change the learning objectives for astronomy, but largely they don't change. These resources and content elements change based on innovation. A new startup comes and develops a new way to help kids learn. Now we have Steph Curry teaches math instead of just LeBron James teaches math, right? Whatever we think about as the new, better way for folks to learn, these change and should evolve over time, but they're all, again, aligned with the learning objectives and the mastery thresholds. And so now this is the structure. And now this is what, if you will, our human body, our skeleton is here. Now here are the muscles and the organs that all align with it. And your full structure then looks like this, where we've got a series of learning objectives, each of which is specific, clear, and demonstrable, has a mastery threshold that goes with it. We're clear how students demonstrate, how teachers assess, and how we display the data. And then over time, we continue to evolve and improve the learning content and the training for teachers, all aligned to these learning objectives. Now we have a mastery content architecture that works for students and works for teachers and evolves over time as we improve. Challenges. So mastery learning is tricky, and implementing it in a world where we have A to F and GPAs and 4.0s is challenging. Some key drivers of the challenges. First is everyone wants their own custom thing, right? You guys have seen this, I'm sure. Every school is different. Every district is different. State learning objectives are different. This cripples scale because now we need to recreate learning objectives and mastery thresholds over and over. I would submit that no teacher in the country needs to spend a moment breaking down standards ever again. No student or no teacher in the country should spend time redefining mastery. Do it once, and then we save everyone all that time, and we have an architecture that works. If that really scares the heck out of people, I'd say, then do it for your entire state at least. And now, again, we save folks all that work and also have to deal with things like college admissions, financial aid, scholarships are based on GPAs, 4.0s, et cetera. And the whole issue of social promotion, A's for effort. In a mastery world, those do not exist. It's hard to make the switch to mastery learning while you're living in the existing regulations, existing legal structure. I showed the content architecture. It doesn't work that way today, right? Curricula and resources aren't mastery-based. And so it's really hard to build the bridge between mastery-based structures and existing curricula. And parents don't understand, right? This isn't the world they lived in. And so it's really scary and challenging for them. And so the work to be done is, how do we save teachers time? How do we make it easier for them to implement? There's a role for automatic grading, though it definitely won't do everything. And then the key really is specific, clear, demonstrable learning objectives, and then defining the mastery thresholds. I've been shocked as a non-career educator, although I've been in education for about 12 years now, no one's defined mastery for anything. And I'm saying, how can this possibly be? Yes, individual schools and teachers have their rubrics, but we need these standard definitions. So summing it all up, the key elements, these are the 5 pieces you need if you want mastery learning to occur: learning objectives, mastery thresholds, and then demonstrating mastery, assessing mastery, organizing and displaying the data. And my last thought I'll leave you with is, we've been measuring teaching for a long time. We should stop measuring teaching. We should start measuring learning. That's what mastery learning is about. So I'll stop there, and you can see my content my contact information below, and happy to answer any questions and encourage you to check out the website and learn more. Heather, back to you.
Thank you, Scott. I love how you boiled that down into the 5 key elements of mastery learning to help us just get it in our minds what the infrastructure needs to start looking like. I'd like to turn to the facilitators on this call now to ask you what questions you have for Scott. What issues arise for you as you hear what he just explained?
Scott, this is Teresa Carter.
Hi.
And one question I had, thank you, I enjoyed your slides. One question I had as I operate in systems that are working toward building mastery is the role of feedback and how colleges teach teachers to give feedback as opposed to the type of feedback that is absolutely critical in a mastery or a blended system. The feedback has to change. Do you have any, we have to teach people how to give feedback differently. Would you agree? And do you have any hints for that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of what I talk with people about is the idea of summative assessment and formative assessment. And sometimes people say, well, which is this, or how does this all work? I really think there's a key difference between a learning experience, a practice experience, and demonstrating mastery. And so I think what can be really helpful is for us to be clear in any kind of learning interaction, practice interaction, or feedback conversation, which part of that process are we in? If we're in a learning experience where a student's still learning, like this content we want them to learn or the skill, they're learning it. And so I think very, very much it's about helping the student learn, get there. If they're ready to try and practice it now, again, I think now you're sort of in a different place where they're kind of sort of through the learning process, and now they're really kind of working on it. At some point, I think the educator determines, hey, I think the student's ready to try and demonstrate mastery. And so I think there's kind of feedback all along the way, but there's kind of this critical moment where the educator can say, yep, I think you've got it. I'd like you to try and demonstrate mastery now. And then when the student tries to demonstrate mastery, in the world that I live in, either the student masters it or they don't, right? And if they don't master it, sometimes we see, are they pretty close or are they really far away? And I think that's a very powerful moment for educators, where if we thought the student was ready and then they didn't succeed, what happened? And I think it's important for the educator to say, well, why did I think they were ready? And then why didn't they get there? And then now what is the intervention, the next learning step that should occur to help the student get to the point where they can now master it? And so I think there's that kind of process of learning, practice, and then demonstrating mastery. And I think the other thing that I've seen is it's really important for educators and students to understand that not succeeding when you try and demonstrate mastery is okay. I had one school that I've been working with that said, oh, your system is creating hysteria in our school. Kids don't want to come to school. They don't want to do the work there, right? And I said, oh, no, that's terrible. And she said, no, your system's great. It's just that we thought they knew all these things. And a lot of what had to happen was for the students to kind of get calmed down and for the principal and the teachers to really clarify, it's okay if you don't master it the first time. That's what mastery learning is about. That's what the growth mindset's about. So that's kind of how I've thought about the feedback piece. Does that resonate or does that answer your question?
No, that resonates, definitely. And involving that student in being evaluative of their own work, involving them more as opposed to the teacher just saying, this is what you did wrong, but changing that language so that the student is part of that evaluation. So yes, that's
absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's also part of the reason why when I say the learning objectives and mastery thresholds are available to all, I mean students too, because then the students know, here's what I'm trying to do, and here's what success means. I had one educator I worked with where it was very interesting. He said, one of the main things I learned as a teacher is I need to be clear about explaining what the learning objectives are, because I've got kids who can master the learning objective but can't articulate what it is. And so I need to change that. I think that's not at all uncommon.
Thank
John,
you.
You had a question.
I do. Thank you. Hi, Scott. My name is John A. Strike, Associate Director at Wisconsin Virtual School, and we've been working with Heather for a while on Ready to Blend things. And I have two questions for you. Is this particular website that you shared with us information available on your website or through a download? And my second question is, what does this look like? Do you have samples of where schools or entities have implemented what you're suggesting and how that looks on a document or an application scenario?
Yeah. So the slides are not on the site or available for download. Some of them are hot off the presses. So especially the framework I just showed you, but the whole comprehensive architecture, I just really have been developing that recently. But Heather's got them. I'm happy to email them to you, or else Heather can email them. So I'll let Heather, you decide if you're going to do that. But they're absolutely available. And then it's helpful to hear your feedback. And I probably will need to put them on my website. In terms of what it looks like, so Heather and I talked about this. So I haven't said anything about my system, Mastery Track, and so forth. But I've been working with about 10,000 students across the country. And I think the key for me is having the Mastery dashboard so students and teachers can see the dashboard. And then I think that then, frankly, the ability to actually create a dashboard is a huge step forward because it means you've actually solved the learning objectives, mastery thresholds, et cetera. And so I think Mastery Track, and again, you can go to the website and see an example of a dashboard. I think there are others that are doing this. So Summit has a personalized learning platform, which I think is great. Empower has been working with Lindsay, California, and I think is doing exciting work like this as well. And frankly, I think more learning systems are starting to put dashboards in their systems, which I think is, again, really exciting and critical. But the process really is that step one of the teacher's work is to look at the dashboard because you see where the kids are. Some kids are further ahead, some are behind, but you kind of see the patterns, right? Are there certain learning objectives people are struggling with? Are there certain students who are just having a hard time? And then the next step is, what am I going to do as an educator, right? Now that I know where the kids are, how am I going to use my skill as an educator, the learning resources that are available to me, and the time we have to help maximize learning for these students? Am I going to do a station rotation type thing? Am I going to do some, sort of teaching for the whole group because lots of students are struggling with the same thing, et cetera? And then it's about the teacher executing that, right? So great, I looked at the data, I developed a plan, I implemented my plan. Now, as time passes and students now start trying to demonstrate mastery, I can look and see what's working. And then I kind of continue the cycle. And then also have conversations with other educators. So, when teachers do their professional learning communities or other, forums like that, the process is they pull up their dashboards and they look at their dashboards and compare and see, so what are you seeing? What am I seeing? What patterns are emerging? I've had situations where schools have redesigned their curricula because they, in Spanish language, they found that more advanced students were actually having gaps in their learning that should have been solved earlier. So they changed the sequence to make sure that kids learn those things earlier. And this is the kind of thing that educators know how to do. It's kind of like backwards planning 101 and data-driven instruction 101. And I'd say, I agree. How come none of you are doing it? And everyone kind of laughs. And the key is having the mastery-based data at their fingertips. But once you have that data, then it's very much processes that educators know. Look at the data, decide what's happening, develop a strategy, implement it, and then repeat.
Okay, thank you.
Scott, I have a question for you, and that is, one competency-based school in Texas that I work with a lot, they say that if you reach the threshold, the mastery threshold that we've designated, that's an A+. So when they churn out transcripts, a student's transcript would have all A+ or zeros. Is that your vision for transcripts?
No, it's not. I think there are two versions of the world. There's one which is a world of mastery-based transcripts. And so I've developed a sort of template for a mastery-based transcript where you no longer say, for example, in high school, you have to have 4 years of English, right? That's not mastery-based. That doesn't make any sense, right? So you can say, look, the student needs to have mastered the content for geometry, the content for algebra 2, et cetera. And so I think that there's a mastery structure, which is simply, how far did you get? What learning content did you master? And there's no translation to a traditional A through F. And I realize that in today's world, people still need grades A through F, et cetera. The way that I think about this, I think the best example I would offer is I was working with some folks on geometry. And so we got working with 6 educators and a couple hundred kids, looking at their geometry structure. And the first thing we did was we said, we need to restructure geometry because right now it doesn't work because they sort of said, well, we have some essential objectives and some important objectives. I'm like, stop, what are we talking about? What we eventually did was we broke geometry into 3 parts. So there's geometry 1, geometry 2, and geometry 3. So of the, say, 20 units, they said every student must master these 10, right? And so we'll call that geometry 1. If you master all those, you get a C. The next group is sort of the next 5 units, and if you master those as well, then you get a B, and then if you master the last 5, you get an A. And the real issue is that the geometry first 10 was what you needed to move on to algebra 2. The next 5 had a content that was a prereq for pre-calc. And so you didn't actually need it for algebra 2, but it was for pre-calc. And then the next 5 were content you actually needed for calculus. And when I said, well, what's the incentive for a student to have to take all 20 units? And they said, for some students, they don't need to because they're not planning to go that far in math. But the key is the clarity about what are the learning objectives, how do they fit together. But for me, mastering something is not an A+. That's not how it works. We need to be more nuanced about the translation to traditional content and GPA. It's tricky, but I've done a fair amount of it, and I'm happy to help folks think through that.
Thank you, Scott. So that's our time limit for this topic right now. Folks, mastery learning is absolutely an important part of student-centered learning. We can't allow our students to progress through the system with a Swiss cheese type learning pattern where they leave with all these holes in their learning. It's part of being student-centered is identifying the learning objectives, understanding what is the threshold for demonstrating competency in that objective, and then how do the students demonstrate competency. And all of us, regardless of what platform we move forward with, can be more intentional as we're digging into actually implementing our plans with doing that work to design the infrastructure. Ideally not at the classroom teacher level, but this is more systemic work that schools and districts and states and even the country overall can be working towards, so that we are allowing our system to be more mastery based. It makes more sense to me logically, and it's really where our schools need to be headed. I wanted to transition here and tell you that I've heard in my work with you that teachers and school leaders face a similar issue of Swiss cheese approach to knowing what they need to know to be successful in delivering a student-centered model. So Ready to Blend right now, we're working to try to solve that problem. And I'm telling you, I spent about 9 months of stressing over this question because I thought, I don't want to just create more libraries of online resources to help you plug the holes. And I've had so many people come to me and say, look, we'll do a blended workshop, or we'll read the book, or we get immersed in it somehow, but we still have all of these competencies that we need to master to be able to implement. What should we do? And I haven't had a good answer for them. So I'm shifting gears here to tell you that this past week we've launched Pro Games, and it's one effort to see if by introducing a series of games that teachers and school leaders can play to master the competencies that they need to be successful in delivering a student-centered environment, we can help everyone advance forward on the path that's right for them. So it's more personalized and learner-centered for the adults in the system. That's the experiment that's underway right now. So just this week, this Pro Games program launched where adult learners can choose a specific competency that they want to master in order to be able to implement student-centered learning. And to Scott's point, the mastery thresholds are defined. I've partnered with Bloomboard to create the rubrics and the assessments and the different pieces that allow these adults to move forward in a truly mastery-based way to master the competencies that they need to be successful. And then I'm also using learning science to gamify it so that there's more motivation to get through the work. So you click on work on this dashboard, and it's a 4-week dashboard. So it starts with the warm-up week and then weeks 1, 2, and 3. You begin by doing your work in Bloomboard. Then you click on share, and that links you into a private Facebook group where you post one artifact that you're proud of from your previous day's work in Bloomboard. And then you click on gift, and gift is where you go back into that private Facebook group, and everyone starts with 1,000 points. Each point is worth 1 cent, so it's $10 worth of points. And you react to each other's shares from the previous day. So if you give someone a wow emoji, that's worth 10 points. A smiley face is 25 points. A like is 50 points, and so on, to gift them based on how much you like what they posted from the day before. Then you can go back to the dashboard, and there's an escape room element. So you get clues to solve an escape room challenge, and that's all to gamify it more. You repeat that same pattern of work, share, gift, and escape every week for 3 weeks. And at the end of that, then we cash you out and redeem your points via a PayPal cash transfer based on how much you earned as you did this work and mastered a competency related to student-centered learning. So I just wanted to tell you what Pro Games is and tell you why I've moved in this direction. Is to try to help the adult learners move forward in mastering the competencies that you need to be successful in implementing and leading the next generation of schools away from the factory model and towards student-centered learning. It takes, in my estimation, about 80 competencies to really move from a factory system to a student-centered system. Not everyone needs to do all of those, but the various adults in the system, I think there's going to be about 80 or so projects that need to take place. And so this is a way to do that in a mastery-based way. I do have a promo code. I'm hoping that school leaders will try this and see if it is indeed a way to motivate your staff and yourself to do this work. So if you'd like to use the promo code, it's ProGamesArrived, and it expires on the 17th of this month for $20 off. So I hope you'll just try it out. We're in a beta test right now. Some of you on this call are doing the beta test. Love it. It's been so much fun to do this with you. The next the next program begins April 29th. So use this promo code to sign up for that one and test it out and see if you think it's something that would help your folks move forward in a mastery-based way towards implementing student-centered learning. Thank you, everyone, for joining this call. It's really great to see you. I hope that everyone will take the steps to make their system more student-centered, and I hope also that you have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.